Good morning. My name is Jane Hoffman, and I'm going to be describing to you about my autobiography that I spent 2 years writing and the reason that I chose the title I did and what the meaning is behind the book. To begin with, I started the book out in the third person. I wrote the entire book in the third person. There's a few passages where I use I statements because it's referring to a quote that I said or a conversation I had. And then during the gambling portion, there are also some second person statements. So with that, I'm going to start, but I'm going to shut this light off because it's morning and it's too bright. So first of all, I've gone through a lot of phases in my life. I'm going to just do a quick outline. I went from a running track and long distance star. I ran over 16 years. I ran 1 mile through marathons, and that covered the ages of 16 to 30. I stopped at age 30 because I ran the LA Marathon, and then about a few months later, like 2 months later, I got pregnant. And after that birth of a child through a C-section, I stopped running because the epidural that was put inside me at the cesarean birth was causing complications for me to run. However, looking back, I did run 1 or 2 months after my daughter was born, but I wish I wouldn't have quit. So there were like 4 major events in my life that were turning points. One was being a cross country star and going to 3 different colleges and running there. The other one was getting married and having a child who died of a heart transplant. Another big transition in my life was my son was born in 1998, 5 or 6 years after Alexis died. And being able to raise him for 26 years was a positive blessing. And then as I got older, I got into a gambling addiction after I relocated from Los Angeles to Duluth after living in LA 17 years. And I had trouble coping here, even though Minnesota's my home state. But I was living in a northern city where it's really, really cold. It's way colder than the Twin Cities. And I kind of found an outlet through gambling, which ended up causing major destruction. I guess the fifth transition would be is going through gambling recovery for 9 years and getting back on track with the Lord. Because in high school, I was really a strong Christian and I was focused, and that led to my success in athletics. But I want to talk to you about the title of The Birth of Strangers. Now, that covers the time period from 1964 to age 64, which is now 2024. I did talk about my birth of a child, but there wasn't much happening between the ages of 0 and 4. The reason I chose that title is because my dad was disenfranchised after he came back from World War II at about 18 or 19 years old. He joined just 3 months after his 18th birthday in 1944 in July. And when he came back, he seemed plagued by the consequences of serving in a world war, the ramifications of the World War, and the impact it made on that generation. So to me, he was like a stranger because he couldn't, he never processed his war service. He never fully adapted to the suburbs and parenthood. And he also had a drinking problem for several years, but he did quit 12 years before he died. My mother was the happy-go-lucky one who nurtured the family, and she produced 4 children. 2 of the children became anorexic, like trying to outprove themselves or having self-esteem issues. I never had issues with eating. I used the food to sustain my body to run faster, but later I got overweight after Alexis died. My brother was kind of like the lost child who wasn't fully identified within the family where the women were dominant. And that was a trend throughout my whole family. My grandma, Helia Winquist from Helsinki, survived the death of her father, mother, and twin sisters. And she was a strong maternal influence in our family. My mother became the dominant parent over my dad. And I consider me being a Scandinavian from a matrilineal family line because the women were way stronger than the men. I also had problems choosing decent men in my life. I've had a few good men in my life, but the only really decent one was Craig Hoffman, the one I married, and I was married for him for 10 years. I was also in a good relationship with a Russian named James Nasimi, and whose pronunciation in Tajikistan is Jehun. And I also had an important boyfriend in the late 90s named Paul Slaviero. Needless to say, the book is about a family unit that coexists, but yet they're divergent in their own way of self-regulating and self-nurturing, meaning that they were all kind of strangers put together under one roof. I would say the only expressive family members that held the glue of the family were my sister Nancy, who recently died and was a major loss to our family dynamics, and my mother, who died in 1998, 8 days before my son was born. She was the only child, and she loved people, and she was a giving person. She was a nurse. She was a church nursery worker. She would do errands for people. She spent time with her children, such as myself. She was a good person, and I would say she was the foundation of my life. The next 2 or 3 people were Lyle Helke and Gary Wilson because they were my running coaches, and they provided me with self-esteem to keep going within my athletic profession. But I did release the book October 9th. It's on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. It's called The Birth of Strangers, and I have all 3 of my names in there. Jane Hammerstrom Hoffman, Hammerstrom. The later chapters deal with my son and his autism and him getting out of the Army and trying to cope with his expression of what he was going through and trying to determine how to communicate better with somebody who's been through a lot of hardships, as the Army was for him. And I hope you can buy my book on Amazon or Kindle Unlimited. What is more important to me is people reading the book than buying the book. In other words, I'm not out to make money, and it's at a reasonable price. It's $10.99 for the paperback and $14.50 for the hardcover. Thank you for listening today, and I hope that you will be interested in this series. It talks about my life from Minnesota to Virginia to Illinois to California, back to Minnesota, and back to California. Thank you.